and I've seen Africans, in very, very important meetings or important rooms. And one of the things that I've also, been guilty of doing is to downplay yourself a little bit. You get into a room, it's filled with white and often older men, and you immediately feel a little bit insuperior. And I would like to discourage us as young Africans from that. If you find yourself in a room, know that you've worked hard and you deserve to be there.
You are listening to NIMDA Talk.
It's a pleasure to connect with you once again. Today, I'm talking to a very good friend of mine all the way in Australia. I will let him introduce himself. Hello, my friend. How are you? Would you want to introduce yourself to our audience today?
Hi, Albert. Thank you for having me in your podcast. It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you and to your listeners. My name is Thomy. I am originally from Botswana. That's where I was born, and I grew up in Botswana before relocating to here in Australia.
Good, thank you. Buyani, what do you do in Australia? What type of work do you do? Are you a researcher? Are you a consultant? What do you do?
Good question. I'm actually doing a few things at this point in my life. At the moment, I'm doing some sectional lecturing at Chatsworth University. I've been assigned the task of teaching their introductory economics course. I've been doing this now for them for 6 years. And I'm also an adjunct research fellow with their School of Business. I do some research for them, but I'm not, your average or normal employee for the university. My most important position or role at the moment is a principal economist for a new company that we have set up here to do economic consulting. This is a new position after I resigned from my earlier position as an economist with Natural Capital Economics, who are also an environmental economics research and consulting organization based here in Brisbane, Australia.
Oh, that's quite interesting. So I can safely assume that you are an environmental economist. Is that a correct classification of the work you do?
That's correct.
Okay.
It's a correct one, but I found myself at times introducing myself just as an economist, and
Okay.
in other cases, just as an applied economist. It really tends to depend who I am talking to.
Right. Oh, and I think I find it very interesting from your background in the context of the fact that you are experiencing the best of both worlds. In essence, you are getting to do some type of teaching in the university, as well as your main work that you do. Can you talk to us a bit about growing up in your home country? Is it the path that you have always envisioned yourself on, or something changed? Can you talk to us a bit about your academic evolution as a person growing up in your home country?
Yes, yeah. I spent my early years in a little village called Mapoka at the border of Zimbabwe and Botswana. Resources, were quite limited. So you had to be applied or practical in what you do. So I guess I got to understand, making do with the little that you have got. But as I grew up, I ended up in the big city in Gaborone, which is our capital city in Botswana. And I went through school there, eventually got into the University of Botswana, where I had enrolled for a BSc, Bachelor of Science degree. And after doing 2 years of that, I then applied for a scholarship to go and study overseas. I was fortunate enough to be one of the few that got that scholarship and managed to relocate to overseas. And I chose to study environmental economics.
Right.
Yeah.
Wow. That's so. Was it somebody in your childhood? I mean, you said that one of the very few, or one of the few that got the opportunity to travel abroad to study. Would you say that you have always been um, top of your class? Like, can you talk to us a bit about your academic performance? Were you a very smart kid among your cohort, or what's the story there?
That's an interesting question. Yeah. I I was always an above average student. In fact, the relocation from the village to the city was a suggestion from my primary school deputy headmaster. He said my mom was working in the city and I was growing up with my cousin and my aunt in the village. So my deputy headmaster at that school happened to know my mom's employer, and she spoke to her and said, hey, look, Biani seems like a very smart kid. He's doing well here in a rural setup. I think if he went into the city, he will be able to, to succeed and explore his potential much better than here in the village. So they made the arrangement. I went into the city where I did do well. And when I did my junior school, I was one of the top students I was the top student in the school, but one of the top in the country as well. So it wasn't just because, I was just naturally smart. I worked
Right.
hard.
I see. I think what I find quite intriguing about your story is that very deep sense of, I think, community and a responsibility for your own, and an appreciation for what I can sense are very, very humble, your very humble background. And so how did you transition from the streets of Gaborone to Australia? How was it? I mean, for most of us from the outside, Australia is a land of the kangaroos and many exotic things. How did you transition? How was your decision to go to your further education, and what are some of the experiences that you had when you moved overseas to continue your education?
Yeah. When I was at the university doing my second year there, and I was looking for courses to apply, and I settled for Agric and Resources Economics. They actually wanted people who picked that degree to go to Canada. And the second choice was the UK. Australia was last. But I started just, doing a little bit of research about the UK. I ruled out the UK because I just didn't like the structure of the degree at the time for the universities that we would end up at. It still had, too much science in it, too much biology, and I really didn't want to go that way. And then I looked up Canada, and the weather just wasn't right for me, coming from Gaborone, which is semi-arid. Gets
Right.
quite hot. It does get, cold as well, but when it's hot, it's also dry. I just didn't like the sight of snows. I know it looks beautiful, but I couldn't imagine myself living in Canada. So I settled for Australia. I didn't know much about Australia apart from the little research that I had done, and I tried to find people who had had that experience, of studying and living in Australia. I couldn't find any in my networks, but I just took the brave decision to go ahead. So I had to find a way to settle in Australia on my own. And, growing up in Africa around cousins and sisters, you don't tend to, as a boy, to do much work in the kitchen. It's the moms,
Right.
the aunts, and the ladies, they do the cooking in the kitchen there. In fact, my father discouraged the boys to spend too much time in the kitchen. So when I
Yeah.
rocked up at Brisbane, I had to go and get myself groceries, and I walked into the supermarket. I was completely lost. I didn't know what to buy. I walked round and round, and in the end, this is quite funny. I walked up with a loaf of bread and a 2 liter of Fanta orange, and that was my dinner because I just didn't know where to start, you know.
Right.
And I was sharing with some fellows from China and Malaysia, and over time I noticed they were eating noodles. So noodles went there in Botswana, so I learned noodles from them, and then I started eating noodles and teaching myself to cook. So that was pretty interesting
Yeah.
time in my life. But it's over now. I've learned a few things.
Yeah, that's interesting. So it's very fascinating to listen to both your cultural transition and your nutritional evolution. And I think that's very for most of us who come to study abroad. Um, from the academic side, did you find the transition difficult? What were some of the looking back? What are some of the useful lessons that you learned on the academic side of things?
When went to uni here, I came to do economics, right? And
Okay.
at this particular university that I was at, the economics subject was taken by all students who were doing economics, those
Okay.
who were doing commerce, businesses, and other courses. So the class was huge. It was in an auditorium, and I was sitting right at the back. But the most challenging thing wasn't just how big the class was, but it was the accent. I'm not sure how you transitioned into the American accent that side, but I found the Australian accent pretty challenging because I had not seen any Australian shows. I was quite familiar with the British and the US accents, but when I came to Australia, it took me a while to actually hear what they were talking about.
Right.
In terms of the content itself, what we are being taught, I feel I was at a bit of an advantage because that 2 years that I did at University of Botswana really did put me quite ahead.
How did you overcome the accent problem? Did you start watching a lot of Australian TV shows? Did you start listening to the news a bit more? What was your strategy overcoming the accent challenge?
I did listen to the news. I've always been a person who follows the news, even in my younger days. So I was listening to the news, and I also made a few friends, and we used to go and watch rugby. They watch rugby a lot up here. So just interacted a lot more with Australians, but I could never uh, fake it or try to speak like them. I found it quite challenging the way they speak. And Australians have got this thing of, every word must be chopped down into pieces. Like a tradesman has to be a tradie. Australia is not even Australia, it's Aussie. So they chop everything in. And even if you try to speak like them, you might sound like them, but you aren't actually saying the same words. And it's over a long time that I've been able to speak, a few of the words that they use in their language.
For most of the what I call traditional PhDs, going into consulting after a PhD is often not the path that they would take. Most people would look for full-time academic jobs, tenure-track positions, and the like. Why did you decide to go into consulting as your mainstay, and how did your PhD prepare you for that role?
Very good question and very good point that you are raising about most PhDs really ending up in academia. I guess for me, it's really the starting point. When I finished my undergraduate degree, I worked as a consultant, and even the desire to do a PhD was never really so that I can become an academic. It was really driven by the challenges that I faced while I worked as a consultant. As you would appreciate in environmental economics, we value a lot of things for which data is not there. Things aren't traded in the market. For example, we know that houses, located in greener suburbs tend to be more costlier than those that are located elsewhere, in general terms. But how do you put a value to that so that the government or the council can invest in street trees and open spaces and all that? Those are the kind of challenges that I had to come up with. When I went to do my PhD, it was to try and contribute to that space so that there are numbers there. There were some numbers here and there. Some of them were quite outdated. They had been published a very long time ago, or the approaches or the technologies had moved so far ahead, we needed new numbers. So for me, that was the driver. So when I got into academia, I quite enjoyed, the opportunity to work on a project for 3 years. That's all you are focusing on, because in consulting, you don't quite get that. At any point in time, you are doing, 10, 14 projects that are moving at different paces,
Right.
So I quite liked the opportunity to be able to dive a lot deeper into something you don't know a lot about, but you want to master. So I liked that about academia. So I did my PhD. When I finished the PhD, I was looking for opportunities. I ended up with a short postdoc position, but me and my wife, I got married in my second year of the PhD. So we wanted to move away from the town that I was at, which was in New South Wales, southern part of Australia. So we wanted to move back up to Brisbane, and I was looking for opportunities in Brisbane, and the consulting opportunity came up. I spoke to, the potential employer there, and I found that their consulting is very, very much aligned to my PhD and the stuff that I had done previously. So they gave me a job. So I moved up here, but I still, enjoyed my time in academia. So I still work with my former PhD supervisors and other people at that universities.
I think I totally agree with you in the sense that I think that more and more academics or people who even have full-time academic positions are going into consultancy and are doing other things that are not traditional in the sense of the path that most people want to take. So I think there's a lot of applicability of some of the skills that we learn as doing our PhDs, and the academic path is not necessarily the only path. And you did mention that, thank you for sharing that. You did mention that your choice set has expanded quite a bit. You have a multi-goal optimization now with children and a partner. How has parenting been for you? Was it a bigger shock as cooking for yourself, or was it much, much bigger?
I was very lucky to have my wife by my side to go through this. But, but I have to say it's nothing compared to what I observed and saw in the community growing up in Africa. And one of the lessons that I actually learned, I don't think I answered this question fully, from the PhD that has helped me now in life, is really time management, setting priorities, being deliberate about things. So when parenting came, when we started having kids, both my kids were born while I was doing my PhD. The last born was born on the day I submitted my thesis.
Wow.
It was incredible. I think I was just tired. I couldn't handle it anymore. So I just submitted it as it was. But I had to learn very quickly. Like, there's no manual, and being in Australia, it can be a little bit challenging as well, or there's just a mismatch in your experience of growing up in Africa and observing your cousins, nieces and nephews growing up in Africa, seeing how their parents looked after them, right? When you're in Australia, you have kids, they are your kids. Everything you do revolves around them. And you can't read a book and it will tell you what to do. You learn, you make mistakes, you correct those, and you do everything. Like we are speaking about, growing up in Africa, not going into the kitchen to cook and stuff like that. But here, you have kids, you have to change nappies. So I had to dive into all those things and help my wife out, and be the parent that is there, that is present. And this intense interaction with my kids really gives me that opportunity to know them, to be aware of what is happening in their life. Like when I pick them up on the car, we are talking about what happened during the day. We talk about their assignments. We get home, I help them with that. So I think it makes that bond very, very strong. And it just, kids are so much of a blessing. You get to know them a lot more, and I'm enjoying that. But I kind of miss that opportunity to be able to have a sister or an aunt to the kids. You can drop by and take them away for a couple of hours and bring them later.
Yeah. I see that.
Yeah.
And you're comparing parenting in Gaborone to parenting in Brisbane. Do you see any big differences?
Oh, there is. Like, in the Western world, particularly here in Australia, nothing is too serious. You walk into a house, you find the daughter standing there and calling the men that are there boys, and the ladies girls and all that. And if you are a traditional African man, you may find that offensive a little bit. But then again, you still have to appreciate where your kids are growing up. This is, as much as they are African, they are also Australians. There will be certain things that they do as Australians that you never did or wouldn't do. But the important thing is to make them aware of the scene. Like my kids, when we take them out to parties and all that, they are into that Australian way of talking or doing things. But I'm not sure if I'm succeeding, but I'm teaching them that, look, some people from our African community do not like to be talked to like that. Or when you are a kid, you walk into someone's house, as you go and greet that person. It's the right thing to do, by our African standards. It's a respectful thing to do. So you let them be Aussies, but you teach them the African way of doing things. What I've noticed is that sometimes the change is not immediate, but you just keep reinforcing that, and eventually it becomes a part of them, like my wife has got a brother who lives on the south side of Brisbane. He comes up here from time to time, and rather than calling him by his first name, I've taught my kids that his uncle, you refer to him as uncle and then his first name, or just uncle. You don't call someone that old by their first name in an African way of life. So I want them to have a bit of Africa in them, as well as a bit of Australia in them. Pushing too hard to the African way is trying to make them live in a world that they haven't really experienced and they don't understand. And pushing them too hard, or just letting them be the Aussie kind of way of doing things, is also denying them that opportunity to be the Africans that they are. And they'll need those skills, because you never know. Some time from now, they may decide that they want to live in Africa,
Wow. So finding that almost that middle ground between the cultural identity and some of the values of the country in which they are born I think is a very, very important challenge. And you talk a lot about Africa, and I that theme resonates very strongly in our conversation. Do you see yourself connecting, or are you engaged in any activities? I know you had mentioned that you always want to give back. Are you doing any projects in terms of human development in Africa, or what's the long-term vision for contributing to Gaborone, or for contributing to Africa in a broader sense?
In the long term, I really would like to start contributing in a professional way as well. And it's been a bit of a challenge. I've reached out to a few people there. It's a little bit of a challenge, but I'm not going to give up. For example, my former housemate here in Brisbane, when I first moved here, he was also from Botswana, and he did veterinary medicine, went back home, worked for a bit, and eventually joined politics and became the Minister of Agriculture. So I had started conversations with him to be able to contribute in that space. But unfortunately, he was moved to the Ministry of Health. So I'm speaking to other people and say, hey, look, I've been in the consulting environment for so many years. This is what I do, and here are some of the challenges that I can see from where I am. There has to be that respect. You tell people what you think, but give them an opportunity to frame the questions or the challenges in the way that they see them, because sometimes when we're outside, we can be a little bit judgmental, and sometimes that's not helpful. So I'm just talking to people just to see if opportunities may open up so that we can contribute.
Okay. Oh, thank you very much. And thanks for sharing. I think I remember the first time we met in Vancouver, I think, and we had conversations about that. So I know you have this deep seated passion to help the continent in a much broader sense. So I'm really glad that you are creating those connections and building these networks that will be useful. And I think you even being here on our show today, I know a lot of young Africans from across the continent listen. And so I think this is also a good way to give back, in the sense that sometimes it's in the narrative, it's in the experience, and to learn from the people who have gone ahead of us is always a good way to learn. As they say, the experience is the best teacher. So to just learn from the experience of other people is always helpful. If there is a young person, I know age is relative and we classify ourselves as still young, but if there's a younger person listening to us and thinking about education, thinking about grad school, thinking about studying abroad, thinking about his or her career, is there, based on your lived experience, is there something that dear to your heart that you want to share with him or her?
I do feel that education is very, very important, and you'll be surprised of how many of us who are PhD holders and working abroad and working at home, when we start talking, we say that we came from humble beginnings. We came from a place of poverty, but we worked hard. So hard work does pay. You can't avoid that one. I'll encourage our younger African brothers and sisters to always work hard. But not only that, I've lived overseas and I've seen Africans, in very, very important meetings or important rooms. And one of the things that I've also, been guilty of doing is to downplay yourself a little bit. You get into a room, it's filled with white and often older men, and you immediately feel a little bit insuperior. And I would like to discourage us as young Africans from that. If you find yourself in a room, know that you've worked hard and you deserve to be there, and make sure that your voice is heard as well. But for you to actually have that impact and have a voice that people want to hear and want to learn from, it's important to go back to the hard work. Always try to work harder for your teams. If you work in a team, be that guy that delivers on time and delivers good quality, given the resources, right? By saying that, I'm not saying that you should overwork yourself. I'm saying you should do your fair share and be consistent about that. In the professional world that we operate in, there are many things at play. And one of those things, is being somebody that is dependable, somebody that is consistent. And always seek to grow. Don't get comfortable. Don't work so hard and get a pay rise and be comfortable at that. And life is not just about a salary. Seek to do, those things that make you happy. Don't just, get locked down into a job because it pays you. Do a job because you are passionate about that. I'm particularly passionate about the environment. And I remember seeing a post about, I'm diverting a little bit here, a story you posted about certain African values and taboos. And I think I commented saying that where I grew up, we had totems, and these totems aren't like the Canadian totem poles and stuff like that. It's like if you've got a totem and it's a certain tree, it means you can't chop down that tree and use it as firewood. If it's a certain animal, it means you can't kill that animal. And I've learned a lot from those experiences because of that, those totems, things, nature was able to thrive in different parts, because we went chopping and cutting stuff. And sometimes when I do speak at conferences, I kind of bring that Africanness in me and say, hey, look, I really learned something from Africa, and I think we can learn something here. Environment is very important. Environmental economics and attempt to put dollar values to these things is also a good way, and I enjoy that. And I will encourage my fellow brothers and sisters to find something they're passionate about, and don't just do one thing. Have some hobbies, do a few things. It shouldn't always be about work. It's a very challenging lifestyles that we live these days, so you need a bit of a break. So look after yourself.
Excellent. Talking about hobbies, just a quick one. What's your hobby? What do you do at your leisure time?
I've done a few things. Some not as successful as others, but more recently I'm just into road biking. So I do in the mornings. I wake up at 5:30, and I ride my bike, just depending on what I've got else in the morning for that day. I would go, for 30 minutes for 1 hour. I quite enjoy that. And I've got friends in other parts of Australia, and then we kind of share, how many kilometers you did, what you've done. I also do bushwalking as well. And I've never really done camping, but I'm tempted to try. But I've always been critical of camping coming from Africa. I think my young life was pretty much camping when I got to the village, so it's a hobby that's a bit of challenging, but I want to just try it now that I've been, up here in Australia for a bit.
Oh, wow. Thank you very much. I think I really, really enjoyed talking to you, and have been motivated in a very significant way. I have a guitar at home that I have had for about 5 years that I'm still not able to play because, but based on this conversation, I think I'm gonna be quite serious, learning to play the guitar, and so we'll see how that goes. But I think one of the important things, in addition to what I just shared, that I've really learned from our conversation today, is the passion that you have, for the work that you do, the passion that you have for family, and the passion that you have for community. And you're the only PhD that I've heard who had a baby just the day that they submitted their dissertation. I think that's a monumental achievement, and that you should always be proud of, in addition to the many things that you have done.
Thank you very much, Albert. It's been a pleasure to be able to speak to you this morning, and thank you for the podcast as well. I believe it's an excellent platform to hear the voices of our African brothers and sisters. So well done on that, and keep loving the continent and our brothers and sisters. Thank you for that.
All right, thank you very much. We'll talk again.
Thank you.
You are listening to NMDA Talk.